Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes? No? Yes, brilliant. Wonderful. I apologize that I'm the one person standing between you and the drinks, so I will endeavor not to go on for very long. Welcome to Matrix. So I'm Matthew. I'm the project lead and co-founder for Matrix. I'm also CEO and CTO at Element. Who here knows what Matrix is already? Okay, that is a reassuringly large number of people. I guess it may be something to do with the coordination for the summit happening over Matrix, as well as the fact that Matrix has now been around for a little while. But just to recap it from my perspective, if nothing else, the idea of Matrix is that it is this open standard and open protocol for secure, decentralized real-time comms. Now, you're probably familiar with using it for chat. However, you may not be familiar that you can use it for one-to-one and group VoIP. You could also use it as a general-purpose data fabric for any kinds of real-time structured data, so publishing and subscribing with end-to-end encryption of anything. Could be Internet of Things data, it could be, I don't know, telemetry of drones, it could be geospatial data. You can even use it as a communication layer for VR and AR. However, most people use it for chat. And the mission of Matrix is really to build the missing real-time communication layer of the open web. So, when Tim Berners-Lee came up with the web in the first place, it was very much intended to be this amazing dynamic read-write environment. In fact, I was checking out the code to the original web browser, written, of course, for NextStep the other day, and was shocked that even from the outset, you had an authoring component built in there. So you could both read the web pages and you could author HTML. However, my theory is that HTML got way too popular too early, and people started blasting out GeoCities sites and creating crazy web apps on HTML. And so the kind of interactive, real-time interaction got forgotten. Now, nowadays we have ActivityPub, looking at the kind of microblogging, social web use cases. But for the real-time instant messaging and VoIP with privacy, Matrix is still the main place where this is happening. So the idea of Matrix is that no single party should ever own your conversations. There should not be possible to have a Facebook or a Google or some other big sort of information silo who goes and sucks up all of your conversations and controls it. Instead, everybody should be able to run their own server in a big, open, public federation, a bit like email. However, better than email, conversations get replicated over all participants. So again, you can't end up with a Gmail-style situation where everybody just gloms onto that server, because the second that anybody spins up their own server, they will keep a replica of all of those conversations themselves that they participate in. So architecturally, it looks like this. You've got a mesh of servers replicating these conversations together, and then you have Matrix clients in green that connect through to these servers. You then have the concept of application services, which allow you to basically build out additional functionality on Matrix. And the typical thing that people do is to build bridges to other systems. Now, I hasten to say the bridges are always a compromise. There is always an impedance mismatch between IRC or XMPP or Discord, Slack, WhatsApp, whatever, into each other and also into Matrix as a kind of common language. But some people do use it, like I saw that the hash summit on Ubuntu.com room is bridged through to Telegram, using a bridge run on a completely different server to the Ubuntu.com one, I believe. And people can also bridge on to IRC or other systems too. Now, a diagram you might not have seen is the way that Matrix sometimes gets deployed outside the internet. So on the right-hand side, we have this slightly opaque blob of the internet. But often, particularly in the last few years, we're seeing more and more deployments of Matrix in big private federations for people like NATO or, I don't know, the French government or the German government, who go and spin up lots and lots of servers in different ministries and departments which interoperate with one another. And then they might have links through to, say, higher classification networks for operating at secret or top secret, which go and connect through what are called cross-domain gateways, which are these crazy hardware appliances that go and basically check the information that is going back and forth between these private federations. And you can also have a border gateway that goes and connects your private federation through into the public internet. And the reason I mention this is that the world of Matrix is currently split into slightly random ways, half of it being a whole bunch of open source enthusiasts, such as ourselves, going and using it as a modern version of IRC, and then also a lot of people in the public sector, in governments, using it as a secure way for different governments and organizations to communicate with what they call digital sovereignty, i.e. the ability to run all of their comms themselves. I'll talk a bit more about it later. In terms of Matrix's vital stats, right now we are at around 170 million federated known users ever. Now this does include people who have never come back, so it's very much a high sort of estimate to the total number of Matrix IDs ever, but it is what you get if you select star from users on every Matrix database that reports back to the matrix.org Foundation on its usability stats. And then in terms of monthly active users, which is a bit more of a useful metric, you can see that over the last couple of years, we've gone up from around 1 million monthly active users to at the moment around 4.5. It's dipped a bit over the summer, but is starting to come back now. You can see there is a kind of sawtooth pattern as the calendar year progresses over the years, and currently growing relatively linearly. So, another quick silly metric on Matrix is that Stack Overflow goes and runs a survey every year to ask what tools people like. You know, what's the most favorite Linux distribution? What's the best programming language? And what is the most admired synchronous communication tool? And we were fairly chuffed to see that we are, as Matrix, the most admired communication tool, just edging out Discord and Signal by about 0.3%. However, we, in terms of desired, in practice, I guess we're second to Signal in terms of open source desired ones, but a lot of people, in terms of what they actually want to be using right now, end up saying, hey, it's Slack, Discord, and Teams, is where it's at. So architecturally, how does Matrix work? The way the Matrix works is that your chat rooms are what we call directed acyclic graphs of information, that they're made up of events like Matthew joins a room, Matthew sends a message, Matthew kicks somebody out, Matthew sends a file, and all this sort of thing. And in practice, they're very similar to a Git repository. And I'm sure that everybody here is familiar with Git, and how it works is basically a graph of commits. Well, in Matrix, each room is effectively a repository, and each message is effectively a commit going and showing the various people across the various servers going and pushing and pulling those commits from one another. I have a vaguely pretty diagram here, which I will try to scroll into. Sorry for the crappy resolution. And you can see what happens is that if Alice is on alice.com, then to send a message, that's literally the code that she might send in order to say hello as an m.text type of message to that URL on her server. And so it is a one HTTP post, and she gets back an event ID. That server then starts building up this directed acyclic graph data structure, persists it in the server, and pushes it out to the other servers in the room. And here, the HTTP request is a bit more ugly because it's got some signatures from her server on it, as well as a few other bits of metadata that have crept in. If we then hit next again, then you can see that it gets sent out to Bob and Charlie.com and their respective servers. And what happens is that Bob and Charlie just poll on the /sync endpoint, and it blocks until there is a message to be received, and then they receive it. And you can see I'm a fish or whatever the message is, and again, the m.text type and the extensible event type there as well. So that's basically what happens as Matrix operates. And what we can see here is that Bob might send a response, which starts to build out a more complicated data structure. And say if Charlie also sends a message at the same time, then the three servers are out of sync. Oh no, it's disaster. It's like you get repositories where some people haven't pushed all of their commits yet. And all that happens is that subsequently, Bob will send out his message to Alice and Charlie, and Charlie will send out his message to Alice and Bob. And you can see at this point the three servers have got roughly the same data structure developing inside it. So that's all the matrix is doing. It's basically replicating graphs of data across a set of servers whilst going and implementing access control to make sure that people get kicked and they get given power levels and made operators or invited and parted and all the other semantics that you would expect. And in fact, it turns out that the main academic novelty of Matrix is that it does provide this decentralized access control. I'll talk a bit about it in a minute. Where have my slides gone? There they are. So, as I said, state resolution is actually the sort of academic novelty. And here is a sort of real graph, and you can see that somebody creates a chat room, Alice joins it, she sets up the access controls, she might say who's allowed to join it, she invites Bob, she invites Carol, and then Bob joins. And what we actually have are two graphs showing how these events link together. And one of them, the black arrows, is just the causality of what happened next. And this is allowed to split and reform, as we saw in the previous animation. But we also have the red arrows, which are what we call the authentication DAG. And this is the important, semantically important state events, things like people getting kicked or joined, etc. And what you do in Matrix as a server is that every time you send a message, you include a proof. You include what we call the auth chain to say, Bob is allowed to join because he was invited. And the room allowed him to be invited. And that room rule was set by Alice, and Alice created the room. So every time you do anything, you basically prove why you can do it. All the other servers execute the same proof. If they agree that you're not breaking the rules, then they allow the thing to happen. If you are breaking the rules, then they will just reject it. So it's a form of consensus algorithm, albeit without any blockchain stuff or anything. Again, it's much more similar to Git than anything. But it's kind of nice because it means that you can set up these access controls without there being any central metadata or arbiter of what's going on. Practically speaking, client-server API, as I said, HTTP post to send a message. To receive a message, HTTP GET on /sync that blocks until there's something to see. Server to server, much more complicated and ugly, and I won't bore you with it, but it does contain basically the pointers of both the auth chain, the red arrows, as well as the previous events, the black arrows, as well as signatures. Now, Matrix itself grows via an open governance process called the Matrix spec process. It is fairly ripped off the Rust governance process, where people make proposals of how the thing should evolve. And you do this by just opening a PR against a single monolithic spec. And then if people think this is a good idea, they propose it for being merged, or perhaps if they think it's a bad idea, they propose that it gets closed. And people on the spec core team, which is a team of 11 people, 10 people at the moment, go and put checkboxes on the GitHub PR to say whether they think this is a good idea, and then it gets merged into the spec itself. So this is very different to, say, a IETF RFC process, or say an XMPP, XSF, XCP process, where you have lots and lots of different RFCs, or lots of different ZEPs. Instead, in Matrix, you basically have one spec, which is currently on Matrix 1.12 as of last week, I believe. And then people update it with PRs. So it feels more like one homogeneous project that is growing over the years. And you can see, at least until I last generated this graph, that it grows in a suspiciously linear fashion with new MSCs coming in, a bunch of them getting closed, and a bunch of them getting merged, and roughly twice as many coming in as are getting solved, as is often the case on these projects. In terms of the life cycle, again, I won't go into massive detail, but it's kind of fun in that anybody can just sketch out a proto-matrix spec change. There isn't a formal template or anything. They can then turn it into a real matrix spec change. Again, there isn't really a formal template. It's free-form markdown to say, hey, I think that matrix should allow you to, I don't know, define bands based on whether people's names contain a particular letter or something like that. You'd say how you think it's going to work. Then people will pile on to go and review it and explain, we already have this much more generic MSC that allows you to ban people based on regexs, and so on and so forth. And then it basically goes all the way through until eventually it gets released in the next quarterly release of Matrix. And we have some fun games about vendor prefixing. Anybody from the web will be familiar with the nightmare of what do you do when you introduce new HTML tags or new CSS attributes and directives. We have the same drama in Matrix, but these days we have it just about under control. If anybody cares about a comparison with XMPP, it's worth noting that Matrix is a completely diametrically opposite philosophy and architecture in almost all ways. And the history of the Matrix team is that we did start off building XMPP-based chat apps about 10 or 13 years ago or so, and got a bit frustrated by some of the limitations that we experienced at the time. And so we created Matrix as this thought experiment of what would it look like if you built it with web technologies, making very different decisions along the way. So you have a single monolithic consistent spec. You have completely different primitives. Matrix is all about replicating conversation history. It is not message passing or pub/sub. Group conversation is a first-class citizen. You don't really have DMs in Matrix. Instead, you have chat rooms with 2 people in them. There is no special concept of direct messaging anybody, which is very convenient if you have multiple devices or if you want to, I don't know, include a bot or an assistant into a conversation. End-to-end encrypted as a first-class citizen because, let's face it, if Matrix is replicating all of your conversations between every server that participates in that conversation, that could be a lot of people. Now, if we just dip into, say, the Ubuntu Summit room right now, which I have hopefully here, and we go and open up DevTools in my Element web, you can view the servers in the room, and you can see that we've got, well, probably at least 20 or 30 in there. 123 on matrix.org right now, but 41 on ubuntu.com, as you'd expect, 2 on kde.org, 2 on mozilla.org, 1 on element.io, 36 bridge from Telegram on t2bot.io, etc. So if this room was end-to-end encrypted, you would be splatting the JSON of all of these messages over all of these different rooms. Sorry, shall I change the theme on this to make it a bit more legible? Bling! There we go. Sorry if that was not legible enough. And so yeah, I mean, if we just pick one of these messages, like I think I saw it near the entrance, you can always view source in Matrix. Again, it's like the web, and you can see under the hood, we've got the JSON of this body and this message type. You can see the timestamp it was sent, the sender who I'm picking on, apologies, the type of the message here. But it could be a lot more exciting thing. Let's find a more exciting message in the scroll back, like a picture. Let's go and look at this one. Much more fun. We've got the file name here. We've got its metadata, like its width and its height. How many bytes is it? What's its MIME type? We can see the underlying binary blob URL, which again is replicated over Matrix. If this room was encrypted, then there would also be the initialization vector and the key of the AES-256 keys needed to decrypt the binary blob. But my point is that if this wasn't a public room, which is being indexed by Google and things, and it was private, then obviously you need to have end-to-end encryption in there. Right. So finally, as a comparison with XMPP, we're using HTTP and JSON as the baseline API. Super important to understand that Matrix is not just HTTP and JSON. It can very much use other more efficient transports. We have CoAP and CBOR-based low bandwidth Matrix, which is about a 65 times improvement in bandwidth over dear old HTTP and JSON. There are various other low bandwidth Matrix dialects as well. And also, in the end, we called it Matrix because it is about defragmenting and bridging and linking together existing silos rather than necessarily trying to be a new network in its own right. So this is what the ecosystem looks like these days. You've got the Matrix spec as the kind of holy of holies in the middle. I just explained how it evolved via Matrix spec changes. Then we have various servers at the bottom. We have Synapse, which is the original Python and twisted implementation of Matrix. We have Dendrite, which is an experimental Golang implementation. There are then lots of bridges and bots and services to other platforms. And then in purple, we have stuff that the wider matrix community does. So there is the conduit Rust matrix server. There is also the conduit fork of that. There is another fork of conduit called Grapevine. There's eJabberD, the Erlang XMPP server that also supports matrix now. There is an Elixir implementation called Polyjuice. There's a C++ one called Construct, and so on. And again, lots of other bridges, bots, and integrations too. And then on the client side, we have, and by the way, the green stuff is stuff which is published by the Matrix Foundation, although Dendrite should actually no longer be green, and I'll talk about that in a bit. So you have SDKs for the web on JavaScript and React. You then have the old legacy SDKs in Swift and Objective-C for iOS, and Kotlin and Java for Android. And we have what we call our sort of first generation apps, Element Web, Element iOS, and Android, as written by Element as a kind of flagship app on top of the Foundation SDKs. We also have Element Cool as a new VoIP conferencing system that I'll talk about. Then we have Hydrogen, which is, as you can see, grayed out. So unfortunately, Hydrogen has suffered from funding woes over the last couple of years and is currently on hiatus. This is a progressive web app toolkit for Matrix clients. So very, very small code base. It's about 70K of HTML and CSS and JavaScript. It has no dependencies at all. It is written in that well-known vanilla JS framework. And then on top of it, you have Hydrogen itself as a demo app. And we also built Third Room, which is an entire metaverse, spatial and compute environment on top of this too. Then, the most relevant things, Element X on iOS and Android are the latest generation apps from Element, which are built on top of the Matrix Foundation's Matrix Rust SDK. So this is the way of the future, where we've basically got rid of the old Swift and Kotlin specific stacks on mobile, and instead written an entirely new one in Rust using a new end-to-end encryption implementation called the Dozmats, and a new crate called Rust SDK Crypto that sits around it, which has been super important in terms of improving the reliability of Matrix's encryption. And then again, loads and loads of other clients out there. There is Fractal for GNOME, there's Quaternion and Qt, there's NeoChat, there's Neko, even Mozilla Thunderbird has Matrix built into it alongside SMTP these days. So, brief history, just to give you an idea of how we ended up here. The team working on this has actually been together for a hilariously long time, since 2003. We started off doing phone network APIs. That company got acquired by a telco vendor in 2010. After a few years working in the telco industry, we decided that perhaps it would be a good idea to see if we could build an alternative to the phone network, but on the internet. And then in 2014, so it is not just Ubuntu's birthday, but also Matrix's this year, and that 10 years ago, almost to the week, we launched Matrix. Started to do end-to-end encryption, created Element as a flagship client in 2016. The core team then set up Element as a company to try to keep the lights on in 2017. But then in 2019, we launched Matrix 1.0 and set up the Matrix.org Foundation as a non-profit vehicle to look after the protocol on behalf of everybody. We finally turned on encryption by default in 2020, and then over the last few years, we've been busy working on Matrix 2.0, which is what this talk is all about, and which is what we launched a few weeks ago at the Matrix conference in Berlin. So, the whole philosophy here was, first of all, we'd make it work, and that was what the original launch was back in 2014. Then we made it work right and got it out of beta, which was Matrix 1.0 in 2019. But nowadays, the emphasis is very much on make it work fast, make it work beautifully, make it outperform the mainstream alternatives. So some of the things wrong with original Matrix 1.0, which may be familiar to anybody who has used it over the last 5 years, is that it can be slow. Particularly if you're on a power user and you're in tens or hundreds or even thousands of rooms. I'm in about 8,000 conversations, so I get a particularly bad experience. Login can be awfully slow. Like on my account, it's 25 minutes on Matrix 1.0, which is ridiculous. Slow launch too. To just launch Matrix client on Matrix 1.0, again on my account, is typically about 1.5 minutes. Slow sync. I don't know if anybody has experienced the joy of not using a Matrix client for a week or two, and then going back, opening it, and discovering that it takes 10 minutes to go and synchronize everything that was happening whilst you were gone. Also, slow room joins. You can go and set up a new Raspberry Pi somewhere and go and try to join a big room with 100,000 people in it, spanning 10,000 servers, and it will literally take 3 hours and gigabytes upon gigabytes of RAM. Then other problems. Authentication. We had no 2FA. There was very clunky custom authentication built into the protocol, but not using an existing auth standard. We had basic VoIP for one-to-one calls, and we embedded Jitsi as a quick hack to get group confidencing in, but we didn't have any end-to-end encryption and no native matrix calling. Then finally, and literally to the point of becoming an internet meme, encryption is not always as reliable as it should be. And overall, there's a reputation for Matrix being a bit geeky, a bit of a sort of socks and sandals open source thing that doesn't compete with mainstream solutions and being a bit hard to use. So, this is what we set out to fix with Matrix 2.0. So the whole mission here is to make it as fast and as usable as the mainstream alternatives. This meant a whole bunch of new APIs. First of all, completely change how sync works. We call it sliding sync. Secondly, add native group voice and video. Thirdly, switch our authentication to be OpenID Connect so that we get two-factor auth, multi-factor auth, UB keys, whatever existing things we can inherit straight from the OIDC community rather than wrapping our own authentication. And then finally, completely fix our crypto to the extent of calling it invisible crypto. We want it to be as invisible as Signal's encryption, or iMessage, or even WhatsApp, where the users have no idea that it's end-to-end encrypted because it just does it. And like Matrix historically, which could often say, oh, sorry, I can't decrypt that message, or I don't have the keys yet, or you need to do a weird verification thing that we don't understand in order to try to work. Instead, it should be completely transparent. And finally, it should be written in Rust. It should be audited, it should be well understood, it should be robust. And so that is why we built it on Matrix Rust SDK with this new SDK crypto crate implementation. So the big news is that as of September the 20th, 2024, these are all implemented and usable. The slightly bad news is that whilst the Matrix spec changes have stabilized and are on track for final call for proposal to merge, they're not actually merged into the spec yet. So I'm cheating a bit by saying that Matrix 2.0 is here because it's not actually in the spec, but the implementations are here enough that everyone can play with it and see how well it works. And then as we go through the final process of polishing the spec, it will eventually land in the coming months. We will bump the major version of the spec to be 2.0 when these and their various dependencies merge. So, here comes the science bit. Simplified sliding sync. The whole idea here is that the server should only tell the client about the rooms the client needs to display. So the reason that my account takes 20 minutes to log into is because it sits there downloading all of the metadata for all 8,000 conversations that I'm in, even if it is some random Telegram chat that I glimpsed at 10 years ago and then decided to lurk in. You know, if that's got 10,000 users in it, then it's going to still sit there burning time, burning resources. We do lazy load, the membership of these rooms, but it's still an awful lot of processing to take these all down to the client. So instead, the whole idea is that we will paginate everything, we will lazily load in only the rooms that you care about. However, it's been a bit of a wobbly ride, to say the least. First of all, yours truly had the brilliant idea that this should be all calculated server-side, and that clients will get a sliding window, and it will receive operations to update that sliding window of your room list, and if necessary, fix up the ordering client-side. This was very strongly influenced by Discord, if anybody knows how Discord works, the way it gets its incredibly good performance in these massive rooms is that all of the lists are basically a little state machine where the server can go and insert and delete and switch and reorder things as needed, depending on what is happening in that room list. It never downloads the whole room list. So it's even better than like gradually paginating it in. It's this very fancy thing where the server is managing all of the order for you. Now, there turned out to be a minor flaw in this amazing plan, which we discovered after having implemented it about 3 times over, which is that clients are the only things in Matrix that actually know the correct room list order. Because the rooms are end-to-end encrypted, the server can't reliably give the correct order, and so you can't go and visualize it correctly on the client. And so rather than trying to fix it up on the client afterwards, which then becomes horribly fragile, instead we have simplified the whole thing, and effectively now, the way sync works in Matrix is that it paginates. So it just goes and does a rough ordering based on timestamp, and then the client goes and does all of the correct, fine detailed ordering. But we no longer have this idea of a sliding window that moves up and down the room list. And honestly, it is a transformative improvement, which I will demonstrate in a second. Secondly, OIDC. We're now calling it next-gen auth. The whole point here is to realize that Matrix is a communication protocol. It's not an authentication protocol. And whilst we do have auth in it that is very similar to OAuth 2.0, it doesn't benefit from all the effort that you get from the OpenID ecosystem. And we embarrassingly started to sprout security issues, which OIDC had already fixed. Therefore, we are moving everything over to using OIDC as the APIs. It's not SSO, it's not social login, although you can use it if you want to for that. Instead, it's basically next-gen auth APIs. And it is interesting to see that both XMPP and the Blue Sky folks at Proto are also in the process of moving everything over to OIDC for auth. And in return, you get login via QR code, complete with all of your encryption state. You get 2FA, MFA, passkeys. No more implementing these weird Matrix auth APIs on every client you write and every home server that gets written. Users are now handing their password to the server rather than randomly handing it to a client that they just pulled off GitHub and prayed that isn't malicious. You get consistent auth and account management across all the different apps. You can, for instance, just automatically log in on new clients if you're already authenticated with your identity provider without either having to type in a password, etc. Right now, this is written in Rust as a separate module called Matrix Authentication Service, but it will be integrated natively into Synapse in future. So, sorry for all the words. Let me show you something a bit more concrete. If we flip back here to my test account, and I'm going to plug in my phone and pray that this horrible operating system, and I do apologize for using the wrong operating system while standing here, is able to actually display my phone at the same time. And you get to see me, hello. Right, there we go. So, oh, they're on TV. If I go and take element X here, that's what you see on iOS right now. And you may see that it now has a sign in with QR code button. If I go and hit it, it says open element on another device to get the QR code. And if I open element here, I have this link new device on element web. I can go and click on it. I can go back, ready to scan, and embarrassingly move that out the way. And you can see if I scan it like so, it gives me a check code. Hit continue. Nice. And now what we are in is in the Matrix Authentication Service, OIDC identity provider, which is saying, do you really want this iPhone to have access to your account? They will be able to see all of your messages and be you, basically. I'll say, yes, I do trust that. I grant access. And then that's it. On my phone, I'm now logged in. And you can see I'm on TV, I'm here too, I'm the Debian guy, etc. So it's one of these frustrating demos because it's almost anticlimactic. It's so simple. If you were logging in Matrix 1.0 mode, first of all, we're going to have to remember what server I'm on. You'd have to no, manually remember that this account is actually on element.io, it's not on matrix.org. Then you've got to remember your username. Then you've got to remember your password. Then you've got to verify this thing somehow, perhaps using a recovery passphrase or doing a different QR scan or whatever in order to go and synchronize everything together. Whereas now we literally have a single button which is synchronizing all of your end-to-end encryption, doing an instant sync, an instant login via sliding sync, as well as using OIDC for the auth under there. And if I go, say, into my settings here, I can look at my various sessions. It's given it some pretty ugly session IDs which we need to improve, but one of them, last activity at 1729, is going to be me signing in on that IP address. And if I want to, I don't know, kick it out from here, then it will actually take me through to the IDP where I can go and mess around with it some more and sign it out, etc. So this is the way of things to come here. Right. Where was I? So other things in Matrix 2.0. Native VoIP. So we're finally migrating from the old legacy mix of native matrix one-to-one calls and Jitsi to there basically being a single native matrix VoIP standard. This is called matrix RTC, imaginatively, and it's matrix spec change 4143. And what it allows you to do is to basically signal both VoIP calls and conferences over matrix using end-to-end encryption. Now, a bit controversially, it deliberately supports multiple different backends for the media layer. So I see this a bit like end-to-end encryption agility. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So for end-to-end encryption, today we use Signal Protocol, the double ratchet, with Ohm and Megohm. But we also have an evolutionary branch looking at MLS, IETF, RFC 9420, which defines a completely different way of doing end-to-end encryption. So likewise, for Matrix RTC, we have two backends. We have full mesh, where every device just goes and calls every other device at the same time, which works, but is not massively efficient in terms of managing all of these overlapping calls. But we also support LiveKit, which is a fun Golang project implementing selective forwarding unit, conferencing servers, as well as SDKs for accessing that from existing platforms. So Matrix RTC effectively gives you a way to coordinate an existing media platform within a matrix room, including end-to-end encryption. So I'm not going to risk setting it going here in the Ubuntu Summit room, just in case something hilarious happens. But if I go to some test room here, I have my video call button here. And at the moment, we provide two buttons. You either get the legacy call or element call. Element call is the implementation of Matrix RTC. So let me go and set that going like so. And hello, Mum, I'm on TV too. If I go over to my screen share, which is still running here, you can see the same conversation. Now, I was trying to test this demo earlier, and it was comically not working at all, probably because of a bug on iOS, which means I can't capture via USB and do WebRTC at the same time. But let's see what happens if I try and hit the join button here. Right. Okay, it's not looking too bad. I've got, well, at least it's working on my phone, but you see what I mean about it all going horribly wrong because it's no longer managing to screen capture whilst working on my phone at the same time, which is a bit annoying. Probably work better if I actually capture video there. Ugh. You know, what I'll do is use the analog gap to hopefully show you what's going on. That said, it's got sufficiently upset that it doesn't have audio there, video there. Let me reconnect here. Talk among yourselves for a minute. Right, there we go. So it works fine if I'm not actually capturing on QuickTime. So this is a fairly basic one. You can see me on my phone here as well as on the screen. But if I, for instance, set a screen share going, I'll just go and capture my whole screen for expedience, then that gets chucked in there too. Now, first of all, I'm participating in this conference in two different devices as the same user and a screen share. So it's not a basic one-to-one call anymore. And if there were multiple people hanging on around in here, you would be obviously seeing lots of people. It will go up to at least 200 or 300 users, thanks in part really to LiveKit, which has some nice negotiation stuff where it only sends and receives the video for the people who are physically visible on the screen at the resolution that you're currently requesting them at. But if I hang up on this guy, and I had developer tools turned on, whoops, so I'm going to show hidden events in the timeline here, then we can see what was actually going on under the hood, because there's a whole bunch of signaling happening here. And some of this is me testing earlier, but this is actually where that call began at 1735, where there was a call notify, and you can expand these up if this is at all visible. And you can see that basically I started a call ringing in that room, and it had a bunch of and even that event itself was encrypted, because we see it in both its decrypted form and its encrypted form. Then we start sending end-to-end encryption keys into the room, because each media stream was being encrypted. And yeah, there is literally the key that was being used for one of those streams. And every time the participants of the call change or some time elapses, the keys are getting rotated there, so that you're basically using Matrix itself as an end-to-end encrypted communication there to coordinate the encryption keys that are then used for the voice and video, so that you get end-to-end encryption all the way around. And you you anchor the trust of the VoIP and video streams in the existing trust that exists inside Matrix. In my opinion, this is pretty cool, because it finally converges everything into a single security model, and is very much the shape of things to come. This will be turned on Element Web by default on Monday. So we didn't quite get it out there a few weeks ago, but we are going to be at least making that video button do the right thing. And meanwhile, Element X on mobile doesn't support the old calling system at all. What other things could I be showing you? I should have shown you on the phone, where we have things like picture-in-picture and other nice stuff, but I'm running low on time, so I will not show that. So architecturally, this is what was going on here, that you basically have your Matrix servers and clients, but we also now have these LiveKit SFUs, which are multiplexing together the media streams. At the moment, you focus on a single one, but in future you will be able to focus on multiple ones. So you basically have a mirror world similar to the normal Matrix traffic, but for voice and video, decentralized in the same model. Then finally, encryption. As I said, it should be invisible. First of all, we've had to massively improve the reliability with Rust SDK and our Vedosmat's Rust implementation, and a really, really nice test framework called Complement Crypto, which goes and does integration testing inside Docker of the entire stack. So it will put client SDKs and real servers over federation together in a simulated network. It will break things, you have a failing test, you fix it, and you move on. And so for the last year and a bit, there was a lot of time just spent going and fixing, or writing failing tests and fixing them. And nowadays, we are pretty confident that the encryption is working as well as it possibly can. So to make it invisible, we are going to require that everybody verifies that they actually own their device, which should have happened all the way along. It's a bit silly that it didn't. The only reason it didn't is because of the transition to encryption back to 5 years ago for Matrix 1.0, whereas now we are finally doing the thing where we ignore anybody who hasn't done that transition. We're saying everybody else going forwards needs to verify that they actually own their devices. And then we will no longer encrypt for untrusted devices. So once this lands, basically, if you have not actually set up encryption properly on your client, you will no longer be able to receive or be decrypted, which hopefully will be an acceptable trade-off in terms of finally proving that people are who they say they are, or people's devices are owned by the people who claim to own them. Then beyond that, no more weird gray shields, and there's a bunch of MSCs to avoid authenticity could not be determined on this device error, whatever that meant. And then other things include dehydrated devices, which means that you have the option to keep a logged-in device on the server so that if you log out of all of your Firefox tabs, you can still receive messages because you can grab the device off the server. Then there is sharing history when you join a room or a space that needs to be done. And finally, trust on first use and key transparency, so that even if you don't explicitly verify other users, you get good warnings if their identity suddenly changes. So in diagram form, back in Matrix 1.0 world, we would have classic, say, Element iOS built on top of the Matrix iOS SDK using Jitsi Meet, connected to Jitsi Video Bridge for video calling and conferencing. It would be using libom, our old C and C++ and now deprecated encryption library inside a bunch of Objective-C called MX Crypto. We had a UI kit, UI written in Matrix kit, and then we would use Realm for storage and core data and also file store module. And on the right-hand side, you have Synapse written in Python with a whole bunch of different workers, processes talking to Postgres, federating with other Matrix deployments. Whereas in our brave new Matrix 2.0 world, the left-hand side completely changes. There is literally not a line of code in common. We are now built on Rust SDK, both on Android and iOS. We had to write the async UniFFI bindings for Swift and Kotlin in order to expose the async Rust up nicely to the Swift and Kotlin layers. We have DOSMATs for native Rust crypto. We're using SQLite and SQL Cipher, I believe, for storage. And then we use SwiftUI on iOS, Jetpack Compose on Android, and Element Cool for the actual VoIP calling. Then authentication via Matrix Authentication Service as the OIDC IDP written in Rust, which will get moved into Synapse, although can also be used externally. We now have sliding sync workers here. There are also work underway to replace some of the Python workers here with Rust. So Synapse is basically corroding in the way that Python sometimes corrodes into Rust. So, welcome to Matrix 2.0. All of this is live on beta.matrix.org today. You can also run it all yourself. It's rolling out incrementally on matrix.org, so if you're using a matrix.org server, you don't yet have Matrix auth service, sorry. It will be there hopefully by the end of the year. But things like Element Cool, as I say, are now being turned on Monday. So, I've got about 5-ish minutes left. I thought it might be of interest and topical to talk about how do you fund a project like Matrix. And I'm sure this is something that comes up a lot. The whole point of Matrix is to be this communication layer of the web, and that's what we set out to build. So we started off with Apache licensed implementations of the Matrix core project. However, always knew that the protocol would need a killer app in the way that, I know, IRC and XMPP never really had a killer app. So we chose to build this as Element, as a separate for-profit project and startup. So Element was set up to hire the core team so that we could keep working on Matrix. And then we set up the Matrix Foundation to be this neutral, non-profit custodian for the protocol. Now, Element donated the vast majority of the dev to the foundation because before Element existed, we were nothing but Matrix, and so we basically kept being nothing but Matrix, even if the day job was technically working at Element. However, turns out that selling a pure Apache licensed open source project in order to keep the lights on is hard. So what happened is that Element, first of all, created a SaaS hosting platform called Element Matrix Services, and nobody used it really, because it turns out that the main reason to use Matrix is that you want to host it yourself. So the convenience of having SaaS is not quite as large as one would expect, particularly for big, large deployments. So then Element went out and created an enterprise Matrix distro called Element Service Suite. However, it turns out many folks are happy to use their own distro, which is fine. You know, it's open source. I saw that Canonical have written their own Synapse operator, which is absolutely fine. What isn't so great is when some kind of system integrator does this and then promptly competes commercially with Element and basically price bombs the entire market, saying, well, we can just pick up Element stuff off GitHub and charge you peanuts for it. And obviously the reseller, or not reseller, the taker in the ecosystem doesn't have any of the development costs, and so they can charge whatever they like for it without having to actually go and contribute back to the underlying costs. And last year, this all went increasingly wrong because it's just not sustainable for Element, because Element was shouldering all of the dev costs for doing all of this amazing tech, and then unable basically to get people to buy solutions for it if they're picking up the Apache license things and price bombing. So last year in December, Element switched over to AGPL from Apache for development and switched development to the server implementations like Dendrite and Synapse to be done as Element rather than as the foundation. Focused exclusively on building for governments, hence the slightly unexpected segue into governments earlier. And Element had to pause all of the long-term Matrix R&D until new funding comes in, which is basically breaks my heart because there was a lot of really, really promising long-term stuff, like full peer-to-peer Matrix running over Bluetooth Low Energy, where the server runs inside your client, so you no longer need a server. Low bandwidth protocols, account portability, pseudo-IDs and cryptographic IDs, which are necessary dependencies for account portability. Post-quantum encryption, the MLS work, all of the spatial computing over Matrix, the second generation server, etc. All of this is basically on hiatus whilst Element is focusing on Element X, Element Core, and the stuff I've been demoing today. Meanwhile, on the foundation side, the Matrix Foundation has started fundraising by selling memberships. Now, good news is that things are looking a bit better on the Element side, not quite out of the woods yet. On the foundation side, it's not looking so good. The foundation is explicitly losing money at a slightly alarming rate. So on the foundation side, the way it works is that the foundation sells memberships, and as an organizational member, you get to help support protocol development. You actually get to stop the foundation losing money, get to participate in the governing board, you get conference tickets and blog posts, and generally your name in lights. And you can see that we have a bunch of them. Weirdly enough, Element is the platinum one, but also Beeper, FutureWave, Faircom, Famedly, Fractal, Network, Schematic, and indie hosts, Virgi and XWiki, and also 800 individual members have signed up to help keep the foundation running. Basically, the TLDR is that if you are commercially benefiting from Matrix, it's very, very helpful to be a member of the foundation, even more so if one contributes to the dev costs on the Element side by buying stuff from Element. So on the government side, it's kind of interesting, and as I said, there are lots of governments using this. Some of them donate a lot. For instance, the German government with Bundeswehr Messenger is probably the largest financial support to the Matrix core team currently. There are things like OpenDesk, which is another German initiative from the Center of Digital Sovereignty, Zendis, who's contributing. You have the UN, Sweden, US government, NATO, UK, a little bit from the Netherlands, also some educational ones like NRW. You also have some coming in from France, where the entire public sector is running on Matrix now via chat. You also have a whole bunch of others who are using the tech in production and not necessarily contributing any funding back at all, which obviously forms some sustainability problems. Meanwhile, on the open source side, loads of people out there, I think basically all Linux distributions to some extent now have Matrix presence. You have folks like Mozilla and Wikimedia as well. Blender just moved over, and obviously Ubuntu.com too. So what's next? We need to do a rework on state resolution. There are a couple of slightly nasty inconsistencies that have emerged, but we're actively working on them, and we'll be releasing either a state res 2.1 or 3 in the coming months. We need to ship all of the invisible crypto. We need to keep improving performance and usability. Really try to find funding from somewhere to work on account portability and multi-homing again. And then perhaps 5 years from now, it'll be Matrix 3.0. And honestly, this is an open question as to what it should be. Should we focus entirely on trust and safety in Matrix? Should we focus on completely revamping the encryption and moving over to MLS? Should we converge with the IETF's MIMI, which is the more instant messaging interoperability working group work? Don't know. Place your bets. So we need help, if it wasn't obvious. Friends don't let friends use proprietary chat services. If you benefit commercially from Matrix, please financially support the foundation. Run a server or get an enterprise one from your favorite supporting vendor. Build bridges, bots, build something cool on Matrix. Follow us on Mastodon or Blue Sky or anywhere and spread the word. And thank you very much. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to run late, and I proceeded to run about 12 seconds late. I don't know if we have any time for any questions.
Do we have any questions? We have microphone number 1, microphone number 2. I see someone on microphone number 2. Yes, please, your question.
So, as individuals that don't use Matrix commercially, how can we help make the foundation more sustainable?
You can absolutely join as an individual member. I would probably remember the price points off the top of my head, but I can't directly. It means that you can vote in the foundation and help select who goes into the governing board. And honestly, the more individual supporters we have, it almost acts as a force multiplier for getting larger donations, because we can say, look, we've got 800 people who think this is a great idea. Can you please match everything they do tenfold? And it's a much easier ask. Also, if you don't have money, contributing in some way, whether it's advocacy, filing bugs, really useful, keeping us honest on the bugs which are open, or just using it as a project is obviously good too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. 2 more questions.
Matrix's big thing is that it connects to many different solutions, right? Mm-hmm. But the big customers that you now seem to have are the governments. Are they also using it to bridge it into different services, or
yep.
Are they using it as a solution themselves?
It's a mix. So a lot of governments already have Skype for Business. And Skype for Business is a zombie at this point. Microsoft keeps keeping it lurching along whilst trying to get everybody to move to Teams. But obviously, if you're the Swedish government, you are not going to move to a Teams deployment run in the US by an American company. It would be insane for your government to operate as a dependency of someone else's. And so bridging to Skype for Business is one thing that commercially Element is up to. Also bridging to XMPP, because things like NATO use XMPP today. A certain very, very large defense department uses a lot of IRC, 1.5 million IRC users. And so bridging through to IRC in a government context is also important. The problem is that when you bridge, you always lose the end-to-end encryption. Yeah. So you're missing out on a lot of the good stuff. But if practically, I don't know, you've deployed chat servers on ships in a navy floating around the sea or submerged under a polar ice cap or whatever they're doing, it's going to be hard to upgrade them to something like Matrix. And so necessarily you have to bridge with what is there already. So yes, TLDR, yes, it's one of the useful things that Matrix helps them with.
Okay, thank you.
One last question.
I love membership idea. Are there any brag tags to make sure that my user account has membership and that the room has room membership and that the server has server membership? Because that would be nice, because I want to only talk to people who have membership.
Yeah, this is one of the probably sorest points in all of Matrix, that once upon a time we had this thing called communities or groups, which came with flair, as we called brag tags, because we all like Office Space and imagined lots of flair badges on people. And it was a disaster as an API, because it was this very custom set of APIs purely for managing flair and group memberships. And one day we realized that your membership of a group should basically be membership of a room. So we replaced it with a concept called spaces, where you can group rooms together and you can indicate membership of a space and all that stuff. We have not yet got round to reintroducing flair, and it makes me very sad, because without brag tags and the like, you're really missing out on a trick. We can lock down rooms, though, to membership of particular spaces if you do want to create a cult of some kind. or some kind of access control system. But yeah, it would be really nice to have proper, nice branded flair so everybody gets a warm, fuzzy feeling.
Yeah. I don't care about ACL. I just want to see warm, fuzzy feelings.
Yeah, we need a lot more warm, fuzzy feelings. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Thank you so much, Matthew.